Welcome to the Doom Scroll News Report here on Radio Taiwan International, where I, Amanda Stevens, and my co-host,
Anna Belinsky,
two writers who are political by necessity, cover some of the biggest international news stories dominating our news feeds from the last week. And boy, were our news feeds full this last week. I'm Amanda Stevens, and this week we're tackling the ongoing conflict in Iran, or potentially the ceasefire between Iran and Israel, and a public land sale happening in the United States as a way to fund Trump's big, beautiful bill. Something near and dear to my heart, not the bill, the land. So, and I said, what a week. In one weekend on Saturday, I went from seeing alerts that the United States had entered a new war in the Middle East to on yesterday, seeing that a ceasefire had happened. And I feel like I need to see a doctor for the whiplash I have.
Yes.
How are you, Hannah?
I saw some post in passing. I don't even remember where it was now because, that's just the nature of the beast right now. It's just notifications, information streaming past. And the post said, this is like the Temu version of the Bush administration for the, like the Chinese knockoff version of the Bush administration with the war in the Middle East again. I was like, it really does kind of feel like that.
Yeah. The number of memes I saw for just how many people in the United States were upset by seeing a headline even indicating that we were at war in the Middle East again. And that's, again, also a little bit silly of me to say because I don't even live in the Middle East.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine how everybody in the Middle East is like, God, not this again. So anyway, continuing our trend of having situations update under our feet. Over the weekend, on the very day that Hannah was updating last week's episode, the United States surprised most of the world by bombing 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. The strikes did delight Netanyahu, who has been trying to convince at least the last 4 American presidents, including Trump during his last presidency, to do exactly that, according to David Sanger over at the New York Times. Surprising even more people as of recording day on Wednesday, June 25th. Iran and Israel have apparently already come to a ceasefire agreement, although not without at least one retaliatory strike from Iran against the U.S. Does that seem like a lot? Because it was. So you can catch up with us as we run through what happened and how we managed to, I don't know if we'll talk about how we managed to deal with the stress of it, but we'll at least work through some of our thoughts here.
Yeah.
So getting into the start of it, Saturday, the United States bombed 3 nuclear sites in Iran, Fordow, Nens, and Esfahan, after a period of uncertainty about whether the U.S. would enter into a conflict between Israel and Iran. These sites had been targets for Netanyahu and Israeli strikes, but Israel lacked the firepower to target at least Fordow, which is heavily fortified and built into the side of a mountain. The impetus for this is somewhat varied, but all ultimately come down to that this was an attempt to stop Iran's nuclear program. Possibly, Trump thought that the talks he had been negotiating weren't doing enough, fast enough, or maybe there was something else there as well. But before we get further into this, Hannah, you often ask me how news is received in my relatively liberal neck of the woods back in the States. But this time I wanted to ask you and flip the script. How are people in your state and circle writ large responding to this? Because as we hinted not too long ago, I know that it seemed like it was a vastly unpopular thing domestically to have done.
Now, my circle is pretty different than all the people I know from my state. I mean, you guys are basically my circle now, but it appears to me that those of the latter group who consume a steady diet of Fox News, they obey pretty much whatever Fox News tells them to think and feel about a given event. And in that way, they're actually not that much different than Trump himself, because there was this article I was reading from the New York Times, I'll leave it in the description, about how Trump decided to strike Iran that had
I saw that.
Yeah, they had this really breathtaking bit about how he was asking everyone around him how the Israeli strikes were playing in terms of public opinion. The article went on to describe how the president himself was closely monitoring Fox News, which was airing, quote, wall-to-wall praise of Israel's military operation and featuring guests urging Mr. Trump to get involved, end quote. So I straight up think that he did this just for the optics, just knowing it was going to go over well with his base, which, as far as the Missourians I know are concerned, it did go over well because they are kind of on principle pro-Israel because they like making liberals who are generally more pro-Palestine angry. So, and these people, they watch Fox News, they don't think, they don't read, they don't know anything, and they don't want to. So that's how that's going.
I see.
Unfortunately.
Well, no, see, I was interested because, like I said, and perhaps this is just relative of sort of the conflicts in more of like the western United States, west of the Mississippi. I was, in fact, seeing a lot of news that showed this was kind of a unifying issue for a lot of people in terms of like this was something that people did not want, even though like we're fighting over literally everything else. That a lot of people were like, we literally just got out of a war in the Middle East. However we feel about Iran, we don't want to be directly involved.
I know that Marjorie Taylor Greene was not very happy. Yes, there is like a cohort of the MAGA faction, I guess, who are like extra isolationist. And to them, this is too much. They want to make America great again, so they don't want to make Iran great again.
Well, and I think we've also talked about that in terms of like Vice President J.D. Vance and being clearly an isolationist. And that plays into the America first as in America only.
Yes.
But speaking about America, there were retaliatory strikes. So let's get into the continuing narrative of that. While the strikes from the U.S. against Iran happened on Saturday, on Monday, June 23rd, Iran struck back at the largest American military base in the region in Qatar. Fortunately, it seems that nobody was injured in the strikes and the U.S. has reported minimal damage. So what purpose do you think these retaliatory strikes served? Of course, I find myself grateful that nobody was injured and that there wasn't more extensive damage than what we now know. And again, according to Sanger over at the New York Times, Iran is weaker now than they have been in a long time, both politically in terms of allies willing to come to their defense in a meaningful way. But the other thing that I've heard, again from the New York Times, is that apparently Iran is running out of missiles, or at least long-range ones, which could do a more damaging job. Of course, you and I have expressed sentiments before that if you're going to attack a country, you kind of have to anticipate a retaliatory action of some kind. And as per Seddon and Gabriela Pomeroy at the BBC, the Iranian military literally said, Iran will not leave any attack on its sovereignty unanswered. However, Seddon and Pomeroy's article also goes on to describe how there were signs that the attack was imminent before it occurred, such as Qatar closing its airspace and U.S. intelligence that Iran had pointed missile launchers in the direction of Qatar. But this is really quickly devolving into just me speculating and kind of like info dumping. So where do you fall on this, Hannah? What purpose did this serve?
Every source I read was actually describing it in similar terms as the India-Pakistan conflict. That Iran had to do something because you can't just not respond, but that their response was very carefully engineered to de-escalate. Actually, I remember reading that immediately after the strike on the Qatar base, the oil prices went down. Yes. So they took
contrary
that as,
to what we've been writing.
Right. So that they took that as a good thing. It's weird, isn't it? Bombing to de-escalate. But I guess that's just kind of where we're at now geopolitically. It's all theater, or we should very much hope it is anyway, because I really don't want to see what warfare looks like in the modern age.
Well, I mean, I think even when I was reading about this, I myself was reminded of when we were talking about the Pakistan. Oh my God, there's so many things going on. I myself was reminded of when we were talking about the Pakistan and India conflict in a carefully engineered response, but rather a retaliatory strike which allows for de-escalation.
Right.
Which is also a phrase, I think you just said it, is something that I heard myself as well. And I don't know how to think about this, I guess, in this evolving world.
I get the sense that everybody is scared to take it further because wouldn't that be like a world-ending scenario?
At least I think that most people are afraid to get into a large globalized conflict.
I just don't think anybody wants this to happen. The most they'll do, like I said, or I should hope, is theatrics. It's a display.
Yeah. Speeding on to Tuesday evening, so it started Saturday, now on Tuesday evening, literally last night when I was texting you.
Yes.
Tuesday evening Taiwan time, I should say. It seemed like a ceasefire was suddenly brokered between Iran and Israel, at least according to Trump, who announced that both sides had agreed to a ceasefire. Now, this is so new when we're recording, and it actually seems like both sides initially broke the ceasefire before later stopping, according to a report published by the AP via CTV News Wednesday afternoon. As we record, the ceasefire seems to be holding, and Trump, after castigating both sides for breaking the first agreement, announced via social media, quote, Israel is not going to attack Iran. All planes will turn around and head home while doing a friendly plane wave to Iran. Nobody will be hurt. The ceasefire is in effect, end quote. This is again according to the AP, who currently verified that it does in fact seem Israel has slowed down or stopped after speaking with Trump, and Iran seems to have followed suit. So did this sudden ceasefire surprise you, and what hope do you have that this will hold?
I'll tell you what surprised me, that F-bomb that Trump dropped.
Yeah, I didn't say exactly what he said, but if you've seen the headlines, you've definitely seen. He said, what the F? I don't know what the F they are thinking. And I think he was referring to Israel at that point in time. He was very upset.
I kind of enjoyed seeing him go into his little narcissistic rage in real time. And the fact that no shortage of his ire was directed at Israel makes it that much more interesting because, they're kind of buddies. So it's just funny.
Ideologically at least. But I think this is complicated because you and I were talking last time, the original strike that started this conflict in Iran by Israel last week, God, things are moving so fast, was something that I think still, I believe, wasn't necessarily something that the United States wanted to whatever degree that they did, that they are complicit because they allowed it to happen and perhaps they assisted, right? Or I think at this point we know that they did assist.
Yeah.
But I don't think they wanted it to happen, even though they're buddies, because now they had to go a totally different route.
Right. Well, to answer your question, though, about whether I think the ceasefire will hold, I don't think so, because this is not the first time Israel has continued its aggression despite
post-ceasefire.
Yeah, and plus Netanyahu is so afraid to go to prison that it's really in his best interest to keep Israel embroiled in eternal conflict, and I think that's his MO. I think that's what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have any sources on this, but it does...
Going by vibes, sorry.
Going by vibes, also going by like what we have seen, it is, there are a lot of different factors at play, which Naturally. I can say truly, and Iran's support for Hamas and other groups like that is definitely one of them. I also think it's a convenient excuse for Netanyahu to pursue this, this phantom idea. We don't know to what degree, to be honest, we really don't. So for now, a phantom idea that Iran will get nuclear weapons, which is something that he's believed for a very, very long time, at least for 16 years. Like I said, he's been trying to lobby U.S. presidents to get involved in this for that long of a time. So I think this is a good opportunity for him to take advantage of that. And now that Iran is in like a weaker position. Even
though last week I was just saying U.S. intelligence has more or less determined that Iran is not that close to making a bomb. Not that close.
At least a year away.
Yeah.
If they wanted to.
And whatever they're doing now, whatever Israel is doing now, is only setting them back by a few months. Of course, they may not care about this, of course.
And the other thing, too, that I have heard is, once the knowledge is in a country, the knowledge doesn't go away.
Yeah.
Right? Even if you destroy the facilities, there's going to be people there who know how to do it. And in this case, to do it is to enrich uranium, not necessarily how to make uranium weapons. But I guess I'm asking you because I'm trying to work through it myself.
Yeah.
Like you said, Israel doesn't have a very good track record in 2025 of holding up to ceasefires. But I can say at least for this state of the world, and also truly for the Iranian civilians and Israeli civilians who've been caught in the crossfire for this, I hope that both sides keep to it.
Yeah.
So especially, I can't get into that. That's going to be another topic. Finally, there is one last question that I do have about the Iranian conflict, and that's bringing it back to the U.S. once again, and how the news was received domestically, but this time by legislators. So to try and break down why this is different than what I said before, this is briefly just potentially another case of presidential overreach. Many congressmen, including those from Trump's own party, believe that ordering these bombing attacks on Iran is a deliberate act of war. And if that is true, then according to the separation of powers, he must bring that to Congress for their discussion and approval before carrying it out, which was not done. For his part, Trump and his cronies are arguing that this is a singular strike, not needing congressional oversight. Like, this is an isolated thing. It's not going to happen. Don't worry. This debate gets really muddy really fast because there are a lot of people who do have a lot of different opinions on this. And surprisingly to me, in both parties, as we mentioned previously, there's the uber isolationists. I also think that it's interesting because, as we have sometimes talked about the Republican majority, which is allowing them to do a lot of things, there are those isolationists in that party that are not happy with what he's done. And even people who don't necessarily define themselves as isolationists. But again, we just got out of a war in the Middle East. A lot of people were really unhappy to see that. So what I want to ask you is, instead of asking who you think is right, I want to ask you what you think the chances are that this will fracture his congressional support, which Trump so far has largely been unchallenged in his term by Congress, to the point that Congress may once again start trying to hold him accountable and take back their oversight role in the government.
To be honest, I think there are plenty of people in Congress on both sides of the aisle, actually, who are perfectly fine with bombing Iran. And I think some of them have wanted to do this for years. To this day, some of those people are still butt mad over the 1979 U.S. Embassy hostage crisis, the 1983 bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon, both events which, in their minds, are something the U.S. has never properly gotten retribution for. But the one thing that gives me that faintest bit of hope is it does seem like that really die-hard isolationist cohort are not happy with making Iran great again. But whether that's actually going to sow any real divisions or not remains to be seen, because no matter what they say, it just depends on how they vote. Yeah. So if they get to vote at all.
I know. If they ever even call a vote. So, which, again, I guess to end on that, I would say for non-Americans, we'll just have to see, because this, what they end up doing, I wonder if this is even going to relate to the next topic, in terms of a lot of these people who are upset are about to vote on Trump's big, beautiful bill potentially next week. But I have an issue with that is very personal and near and dear to me and not related to Iran. So we'll get into that right after a quick break. Okay, so speaking of things that both parties can actually agree on, or I guess collectively disagree on, we're back to discussing Trump's big, beautiful bill, something that he's having trouble getting through Congress because it's a lot. And as usually happens when you swing too wide, it seems most people have something they hate about it. The newest one being a proposed way to address its horrific price tag, which would cost trillions of US dollars by auctioning off public lands to real estate developers. I'm going to try and rein in myself, but I don't usually cover my own corner of the United States when it comes to problems. But this one was personal to me and the other 10 states, which make up about over a third of the United States, who are currently caught in the crosshairs of a recent proposal for Trump's big, beautiful bill. According to reporting from Jeremy Tanner of The Hill, Utah Republican Senator Mike Lee, who chairs the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, has decided to pen a proposition which includes the sale of federal lands to, quote, improve energy and housing, end quote, which would then sell them to private, in his mind, what he said, private land developers. However, this sparked a lot of criticism, so much so that one state, Montana, was actually removed from the proposal after the senator for Montana raised such a big upset. In the reporting that I was reading, again from The Hill, the senator just told him, like, that's a hard no, and I will not support anything you do.
Good.
So he removed Montana from the bill.
Way to go.
Everyone should do that. But now other states are joining in, and it is trickling down into local news. So individuals are starting to get upset. Had you even heard about this in your newsfeed, I noticed that your state scraped by without any mention.
So I didn't know about this particular aspect of the bill until you mentioned it. Although, of course, my immediate response is negative because, you know, national parks, the beauty of the land of the United States, that's really one of the last remaining bastions of what really makes America great. I imagine my home state of Missouri Boo. Scraped by, without a mention, because with the exception of the upper half of a region called the Ozarks that extends into southwestern Missouri, it has almost nothing in the way of natural beauty to offer. I can tell you the rest of the state is about as ugly as a mud fence. So
it's a nice metaphor, though.
Straight up, I don't know what it's like to be from a naturally beautiful state and to care about it. So do tell me what it's like.
Well, while I do that, let me clarify something. Let me clarify two things, first of all, which is I was so upset when I first read this that I said it included national parks. It does not include national parks.
Oh, okay.
But that doesn't mean that it doesn't include any parks. It does include local public lands and like local state parks and famous nature reserves, which are not technically under the national park umbrella.
I see.
But the second thing that I would like to clarify is that while the states mentioned in the bill, there are 10 of them. It's a huge swath of the United States that is often generally grouped geographically together as the West, the Pacific Northwest, or the West Coast, just kind of these general broad terms. A lot of us actually tend to have some pretty big policy priority differences, and fights between us can get very ugly, which is something to talk about another time if we talk about water right wars or KKK clans. But this is actually one of the few uniting facts that most of us share is a deep love for these public lands. Senator Lee officially stated that he wouldn't include any national parks. But like I said, that doesn't mean that he's not including any parks at all. And the reason that this came to my attention is because I saw a list passed around social media of beautiful, beloved natural sites from my state, including, if anyone knows Washington State, you might have seen the famous Mount Rainier. It's a sister mountain to Mount Fuji because communities believe that they resemble each other. Lands around that will be sold if this passes for real estate development.
Oh, my God.
Now, something that did catch me off guard, though, was that a small local contingent was for this change, however, even for this bill, because they were saying that it could potentially allow local tribes or states to purchase the land from the federal government and just own it themselves. While opposition points out that once public lands are gone, they are gone forever, and calling this a clear land grab. That's a quote grabbed from Sebastian Robertson for King 5 News. Again, local reporting from Washington State, my state. But I found similar sentiments from every state mentioned in that bill. I just chose to quote one. So I guess what I really want to ask is, like, in your opinion, do you think that this is a chance, one, of going through, but two, do you think that this is a risk that states should take?
Is it correct? I read in that article that the tribes would have first opportunity, like first chance, first pick.
Part of his argument was that states and tribes would have a deferential pick of purchasing lands up for sale.
Does that mean they would be able to afford it? Does that mean anything?
Does not necessarily mean they would be able to afford it, because we don't know what price tag there would be included. But the wording specifically says that they would be given preferential treatment for lands that they attempted to buy.
Man, this, in my opinion...
Again, no price tags were named.
Wow. This is, in my opinion, like peak class warfare. You know, snatching land from the common man to essentially fund tax cuts for the super rich. And it's just a shame that not enough people can see it for what it really is or join hands on that to affect any change. I do think enough Americans value the ownership of their own land that most of them are not going to be for it. And it's such a big government move for a party that claims to be for small government. You know, if anything should remain squarely under state jurisdiction, it's control over their own state's land. But I really don't know. I'm worried.
I mean, I know that, like I said, I don't know how much of a personal stake you have because Missouri's not necessarily invested in it. But I do think that it does reflect a larger attitude that the administration is taking towards public lands.
Yeah, and it sets a dangerous precedent.
How
many times will we have used this phrase, you know?
Well, also earlier, not earlier this week, but at the same time that I was researching this, I found out a new thing that the administration is doing, which is, I think, to either implement or cancel roadless laws, which essentially just means that previously there are areas of the United States, especially areas of like big, vast forests that have been designated as places you can't build roads through.
Okay.
It has to remain natural,
roadless,
and wild and roadless. And that's being overturned. So now they're saying just put roads anywhere you want. Go crazy over it. which may not seem like a big deal if you are from a very like small country. But for the United States, it's a lot of big land areas, and it is what is keeping those areas wild and healthy.
This makes me sad because it reminds me of how China was like gorgeous before they just obliterated a lot of it with infrastructure because they were developing so fast, and that was like the point of it, you know, not to do it necessarily well, but to do it fast and with no regard to the natural environment or preserving it. And that's what I'm afraid of, you know, because one thing you could count on America to do right is to keep its natural reserves beautiful and natural. And now, I don't know, man.
So to close this up, all of this is coming as the Senate prepares to attempt to pass Trump's agenda bill potentially next week. So closing up on this, what are the chances you think that the Senate will actually be able to pass this bill next week?
You're not going to like my answer.
Go on.
I'm ever the cynic. In my own reading on this topic, I've actually only seen people say bad things about this bill. Even hardline conservatives don't like it, particularly if you're fiscally conservative. And the bill is going to be a ton of spending.
Huge amounts of money.
But I think what most people think, of course, probably won't matter. I bet you that all of the Republican congressmen are going to toe the party line and pass it, totally trash the budget, rack up a boatload of debt, and then blame the next Democratic administration if we ever get one of those again.
I'm hoping that at least senators' self-interest will win out against their loyalty, and that they will vote in favor of things that they think will not get them kicked out. And in this case, I do think that means not voting for the big, beautiful bill.
I hope you are right and I am wrong.
Same. But anyway, that's all for today's news report. A quick reminder that you can find all of our referenced articles in the show notes for today's episode. Yes, we read the line now. We figured it out. I'm Amanda Stevens.
I'm Hanna Belinsky.
Oh, and this is the last episode that Hannah's going to be in for the next month.
Just a little break.
So we'll have a special guest with us next week. And of course, I'll be here as usual. So in the meantime, thank you for joining us on air today. Tune in tomorrow for more programs by Radio Taiwan International. And in the meantime, remember to stop scrolling and touch grass. We'll see you next week.